Kia ora tātou, everyone. It's lovely to have you join us. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to play Sarah Lillis's recorded voiceover presentation. And then Sarah's going to join us about 4:30 for live question and answer session. And we'll be recording the whole thing. So if you have others in your class and you know that they would have liked to have been here and they just couldn't manage this timing, do let them know that this includes both Sarah's voiceover presentation and the question and answer session afterwards, if you think that will be of interest to others. So with no further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen. And I hope I remember to share the computer sound as well, so that this does everything it needs to do. So, okay, I'm sharing my desktop there now, so I'll just move to, and
Hi, my name is Sarah Lillis and I'm an occupational therapist. I completed my Masters of Health Science and Rehabilitation at Otago University, Wellington a couple of years ago. And I did this via thesis where I explored how to manage fatigue after a traumatic brain injury, specifically looking at how people did this at work.
So we've lost that now, Jean.
Yes, I know you have. I clicked on the chat function to say to you, Rochelle, thank you very much for letting me know that it's working, and I've clearly done something. So we'll start again. I'm very sorry about that, everybody. So we will just, I will just close that, or at least I hope I will. No, that's not working at all. Let me try again. Oh dear. Here we go. There it is.
It's perfect.
Hi, my name is Sarah Lillis and I'm an occupational therapist. My name is Sarah
Lillis
and I'm a Masters of Health Science and Rehabilitation at Otago University, Wellington. Science and Rehabilitation at Otago University, Wellington a couple of years ago. And I did this via thesis where I explored.
Now I'm very sorry, guys. I don't know why I have got two concurrent recordings playing. And I don't know how to fix it.
I don't know either, Jean, actually, other than...
So what I'm going to do, and I'm really sorry to all of you, is that I am going to leave the, Zoom recording. You should all stay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to close that. I'm going to go in and I'm going to close that PowerPoint properly.
Yeah.
And then we'll restart it. So my apologies to you all. And I will keep my fingers off the buttons in future. So I'll just leave and I'll be back in a moment.
There's always these technological issues, guys. You think you've got it all sorted and then something happens. So sorry about that. The other thing is Jean lives in Fairlie, sort of on the way to the Mackenzie country. So her Wi-Fi is also a little bit slower at times as well. So it can take a wee minute just to get back in. Rob's here, but upside down now. Fantastic. He's like a bat. Rob, Jean's just going out and coming in again to try and reset her system. You're on mute, so we can't hear you.
My camera wasn't working at all, and now it's done this. And I'm not sure.
It looks interesting.
Yeah. Yes, but not quite what I wanted. No, I'm still upside down.
You're going to really confuse Jean when she comes back and wonder what's happening.
Hi all, I hope I can do a better job this time. So let's try for the second time. Oh no. No.
Has the sound gone completely?
It's still overlaying. I've got two soundtracks playing, and I don't know why I've got two soundtracks playing. So this is going to be very problematic. And
any ideas?
Jean, do you want to send me the file?
I'll send it to you. It's too big to send via email, Rob. I've got a Dropbox link that I can put it in, but for some reason I've now got a double soundtrack playing. I can send you the Dropbox link.
Okay. Jane, put it in my continents Dropbox link. Now that sounds interesting, doesn't it? Pop it in as shared one that I've already got a link for, and I'll try and open it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm really sorry about this. I tried this earlier today and it worked. Typical, isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Don't you hate technology? It makes a very good slave but a very bad master.
There's certainly something wrong with my technology skills. There's no question about that. Okay, let's get rid of some of these things so I can do what I need to do. Okay, Rochelle, I'm just in Dropbox now.
Yeah, just in the JNR grant one.
Yep. And I need to... Okay, I've just found the file and I now need to move it. JNR grant, move. Okay, it's just gone now. Rochelle?
It's turned up. Isn't that amazing?
Isn't that amazing? So folks, what I hope is that Rochelle is going to have a great deal better opportunity to share this with you than me and get it to work properly. Don't forget to click the button that says share computer audio, Rochelle, when you share the file. Share your screen.
Hi, my name is Sarah Lillard.
Okay. Oh, now I don't know what I'm sharing. There's all sorts of things. Stop that. Right.
Hi, my name is...
It starts straight away, doesn't it? That's the problem.
Yes, it does. It starts straight away.
That's my problem.
Hi, my name is Sarah Lillis and I'm an...
Got it.
I completed my Masters of Health Science and Rehabilitation at Otago University, Wellington a couple of years ago. I did this via thesis where I explored how to manage fatigue after a traumatic brain injury, and specifically looking at how people did this at work. I wanted to present my findings today with you guys, and firstly I want to acknowledge my supervisors Jean Hay-Smith and William Levac with all their help in me negotiate the pathway of thesis. So firstly, I just want to lay a bit of a scene of my topic. I was lucky enough that when I look at traumatic brain injury, there was a large piece of research carried out within the Waikato area where I am and where I completed my thesis. And they found that brain injury was common. So 790 people per 100,000 population per year experienced a traumatic brain injury or a TBI. 95% of these TBIs were mild and 5% were moderate to severe. The highest incidence in TBI were in the ages 0 to 4, so they're very young, and also in the age group of 15 to 34 years. Men are more likely to experience traumatic brain injury, 2 to 3 times more likely, depending on the severity, as well as Māori population. 33% of TBIs identify as Māori, whereas 22% of the general population experience traumatic brain injury. Fatigue and TBI is also common. There's an incidence of 16 to 80% that's been reported. This obviously depends on the research. There has been no correlation found with the severity of the traumatic brain injury and fatigue levels, so it doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a severe TBI that you're going to have more fatigue. Fatigue continues long after the initial injury, so at 1 month after a traumatic brain injury, 66% of people have been reported to experience fatigue, and at 1 year, 42% were still experiencing fatigue. There is, however, a significant correlation with greater levels of fatigue and poorer performance in a complex selective attention tasks. The contributors to the severity of fatigue include vitamin D deficiency, poor sleep and anxiety, and the variables that are associated with fatigue include that early fatigue severity, early on in the injury, active mental health input prior to the injury, a medical disability alongside their traumatic brain injury, and also reported depression. The impact of fatigue within TBI appears to be quite substantial. Fatigue is associated with poor outcomes in motor, cognitive, and general functioning. It also impacts on people's ability to carry out their personal hygiene, their cognitive abilities, ability to process their cognitive tasks of daily living, their social and leisure activities, to be able to manage their mood, to return to work, and also even just to engage in their rehabilitation activities to be able to improve on their symptoms that they're experiencing from their TBI. So in regards to this and the impact of fatigue, I wanted to explore this further, and I looked into how we manage fatigue. And it appears that there's no quality evidence to support any intervention to manage fatigue after sustaining a TBI. And I focused obviously only on non-pharmaceutical management of fatigue, my investigation. So my question was, how do people manage fatigue that they attribute to TBI to enable them to conduct paid work? So I considered paid work within this to allow me to have people showing that they were able to work and managing the fatigue in some kind of successful way. My study was I took a qualitative descriptive approach so I could get a more in-depth understanding of how they managed and the variation within that. I recruited by community-based therapists that were seeing people with TBI. I completed my my data gathering by semi-structured interviews using an interview schedule. I transcribed these and I thematically analysed them. I had 8 Waikato-based participants and all of working age. That's my group I studied. There's a mix of men and women that had mild to moderate TBIs. I didn't actually assess for mild to moderate, but just going on their information they gave me around their injury. That's the bracket that they appeared to be in. Time since injury ranged from 6 months to 21 months, and they had all returned to their pre-injury employment, so there'd been no job change within that. Well, let's look at my results. The fatigue management strategies that were utilised that I found that seemed to form a continuum. So within this continuum, if you moved to the left-hand side, you had greater productivity. If you moved to the right, you needed to recover more and you obviously lower productivity. So as I said here, the green is indicating that sort of higher productivity end, and the purple is where you're heading into the lower productivity end or the recovery end of the continuum. So I saw people moving up and down these. So when looking at the continuum, as I said, the green is when they're engaging in the work tasks and they're tending to be productive. Purple indicates they're generally not engaging in work tasks and they're focusing on recovery rather than productivity. So individuals were seen to be pulling to their left to achieve productivity or pulling the right to achieve the recovery that they're required to enable them to be productive. So pulling this apart a little bit more, thinking about the intensity of the task, which is our first couple that we're looking at. This is how people manage to get themselves as productive as possible and moving within those high intensity tasks to the low intensity tasks to enable them to continue. So when I look at high intensity tasks, I'm considering things like computers, where it's a lot of screen, a lot of light, and quite cognitive tasks. Other tasks that require a high level of thinking, environments where there's a lot of noise or not a lot of light that people have to complete whatever they're working on within. When they have to multitask, such as talking on the phone and working on the computer at the same time, or cutting out background noise and needing to work on the task that they're doing, and also certain things that have high social demands, so things like meetings or conversations with people about topics where there's that social component as well. Low intensity tasks are strategy that people use where they'll shift into a low intensity task and choose to do a low intensity task. And these tasks are things like choosing an easier task. So rather than doing a data sheet on a computer, it might be that they are checking their emails that are, just reading through some basic emails or doing other tasks that don't require that intensity. Implementing cognitive strategies, so writing down to-do lists, writing notes for things to remember, things like that. Altering the environment, so usually when they alter the environment, they cut out noise or reduce the light. Move to another environment where they can again reduce that noise, so a quieter environment, an unoccupied office, something like that, or whether they can turn the lights off within that environment, or they can shut the doors so that they socially don't have people sort of stopping in and saying, hey, how are you going, and distracting them from their work. Or some people would use equipment where they've put in on headphones that are noise cancelling, or earplugs, or some putting on glasses to reduce the glare around, things like that. Here, because clearly the computer just drives me crazy and the alternative tasks may not require so much, may not be taxing on my mind and on my brain. So we move down in the continuum where they're starting to become a little bit less productive. There's a couple of breaks there which I still consider that they are quite productive, the super mini break and the mini break. And then we start getting into ones where they're less productive. And when we look at the super mini break, it is a very short break, a few minutes, sometimes even under a minute. It occurs within the task that they are completing and within the environment that that task is occurring. So this is like taking a sip of a water when you're within a conversation, not looking at the computer screen for a few seconds, handing the conversation over to someone or asking a question so someone else will respond, and that gives you that time to just stop and breathe. So someone said, I just sit there and not look at the screen for a couple of minutes. As an alternative, is the mini break, which is a slightly longer break. Now, it is a bit more of an obvious stop from the task, and it's away from that very core task, but it's still within that work environment. It can be anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes. So you can see it's not going to impact too much because you're going to be able to get straight back into that task and maintain a reasonable amount of flow in it. It might be going to a water cooler and going to get a drink and then coming back and continuing. It might be stopping the task and going to a quiet room, shutting your eyes and just having a couple of minutes which is quiet and then returning to the task. A few minutes between each patient as well, just kind of to switch off. And now we're moving into the part of the continuum where there's actually a lot more of an impact in the productivity. So it's becoming actually a very obvious break. So we've got the long break where people are needing to really just remove themselves from the task, remove themselves away from the core task. It's an obvious stop from that, and it's often away from the work environment. This one often took a format of going for a walk outside, and it would be from 15 minutes to 1 hour. Sometimes I could do a longer walk. Sometimes I go for 30 to 40 minutes walk. This is often taken in people's lunch breaks as part of their day to ensure that they were able to implement a long break into their day. And then if people had pushed through or felt like they'd not engaged their fatigue management very easily, then they would go home and sleep, because often they couldn't sleep at work, so there'd be a point where they'd leave work to go home and sleep, or they'd increase their sleep at night, so have an early night most of the week. Or in really different situations, they would take a day off. So if a weekend wasn't long enough to recover, they might take an extra day off, or they might work a long stint and then take a day off. So sleep, and particularly days off, would actually happen if someone had either misgauged their fatigue management or they had made an active decision to push through and ignore their strategies to get certain works done, but the compromise was that they'd often have to take a day off. So within the continuum, you note there was the outside work tasks. I've sort of included the sleep and day off in there because it generally happens outside, but we've also got the non-work activities that were considered. Relaxation was also considered an exercise. So I just want to run through these because these were crucial in enabling people to be able to work, was considering some of the outside work activities that they participated in. So the activities, the non-work activities, often people reported reducing their social, leisure and domestic tasks. Mostly the social and leisure became quite low priority. They used their weekends and their evenings to recover to enable them to work the next day or work on the Monday. They avoided computers when they got home, particularly if they had computer use within their work. They avoided alcohol and they also avoided caffeine. Exercise, they did this regularly, and I think all my participants did an element of exercise, and they did light to moderate exercise. I had a few of my participants who had tried quite intense exercise and found that quite overwhelming, and it really exhausted them. They often exercised after work, weekends, and also in the long break, as I've mentioned, when they went for walks. All people prefer to do their exercise outside in that natural light environment as opposed to in a gym or in a class where they had to concentrate again and listen to or shut out background noise. Quite a few participants carried out relaxation to enable them to sleep at the end of the day, to wind themselves down to ensure that they would get a good. Balancing also occurred between the outside tasks and obviously the work tasks, but also within the work from the start of the day to the end of the day, and what types of activities they did, as well as over the week, so from day to day, a Monday to a Friday, and how they balanced it over the week. So I scheduled it as well as I can, and I know that there's low concentration stuff there or high concentration stuff there in the morning and low stuff in the afternoon, and that you could often see that sort of balancing happening, this intensity and then this light, and then thinking about what they did on a Monday and then lightening it on the Tuesday, and not doing too much on not going out 2 nights in a row, but just minimising that. Prioritising the tasks over the week that they found most important, which were the work and the self-care tasks. And as I said, alternating between high and low intensity. So within this continuum, there's obviously these change points that occur between each strategy, or when they are actually being extremely productive and doing their high intensity tasks, and they decide, oh, I need to make a change. Now, that decision point or that change point that occurred was always linked to some kind of fatigue symptom. So they utilise these fatigue symptoms to determine that need for change. Now, these symptoms included things like headaches, difficulties of cognition, so starting to lose concentration or not remembering as easily or becoming overwhelmed, and increased in sensitivity, so noticing noise, noticing light, and finding it a bit more intense. And also starting to get a bit more irritable, so noticing their work colleagues and thinking, oh, it's starting to annoy me a little bit. The fatigue symptoms were always used to determine the level of break that they needed. So if they had overwhelming symptoms, then they tended to be quite far down the continuum into those purple zones. If they only had mild or very slight symptoms, then they would be popping into the lower intensity tasks or even a super mini break quite easily. And the early recognition was the ideal that people were striving for, is the early recognition to stay into that green zone where they're just going between either that low intensity, the super mini break, and they could stay within that productive zone rather than actually needing to go into that non-productive zone on the other side of the diagram of the curve. Sometimes pushing through occurred. Now, this is when people ignored all of their points where they potentially could make some changes in their early recognition. And it would either be they would choose to ignore it, or they would just not know and ignore. And then they would actually have the consequence of extreme fatigue, temporary disability, and 2 to 3 days recovery, where they just really had to stop work, go home, and just take sick leave. This pushing through did actually occur in the very early stages of their recovery, where they would often have, I found most people had this time when they had pushed through and not identified any fatigue symptoms, or not identified that they were fatigued, and had such a substantial impact of that with extreme symptoms that it was almost quite traumatic for them, and they never wanted to be back in that place or that awful place that they were. And this was often a motivator for them to learn about their fatigue and to continue implementing those breaks, because they didn't want to be back there. It's quite important in the acceptance of breaks as well. So the decision on the timing of that change point is really complex. I think the common factor in all of those decisions was that self-defined fatigue symptom. So people would know, if I'm just getting, slightly irritable with people around me, then that means I need to do this. Or if I start noticing the fridge hum, then I need to do that. They sort of almost had like symptoms attributed to different strategies or different parts of that continuum they would do. The motivator was always that not overdoing it, that crash, or that what I call that traumatic experience they had with fatigue. They didn't want to get back there again, and that was always motivating them. But the decision to make the change or to implement the strategy was even more complex than just I'm tired or I'm getting the symptom, I need to stop. A lot of people, actually all people, really had to weigh up a lot in that work environment. They considered what their own expectations of themselves were. So if they had high expectations, it was very hard for them to stop early because they were trying to get something done, and their self-identity was that they were a hard worker and they just kept on working on it and trying to ignore their symptoms. Also, they talked about what other people perceived of them, what their boss expected of them, what their colleagues perceived them as a worker, and how that impacted on their decision to stop feeling like they were being watched or being expected to do so much within their work environment, made them hard to implement the strategy that they felt they needed to do at that time. And the priority of the task came up a lot. So if they had timeframes or there was something imminent that was happening that they couldn't change, that something needed to be done for that day, they would often make that choice to push through, to to get that item done, knowing that they could then take 2 to 3 days afterwards, and that would be fine within that work culture, because it was all about the end point until they could just rest or take that time off. And the whole analysis of that continuum and how people really learned about their symptoms and learned what strategies would sort of fit where and how to maximise their productivity was obviously a huge learning process. And it was a trial and error learning process. You'd see early on that they'd make a lot of errors in their judgment of when they were going to be taking a break, but then they would take a mini break when possibly they should be taking a long break, and sort of that identification of this is an extreme symptom, this is only a mild symptom, and recognising how they could actually take different strategies quite high up on that continuum to remain productive, rather than, you know, bringing themselves down into that sort of purple zone, which was very unproductive. And over that the whole time of working and doing the trial and error of learning of their symptoms and the strategy and how to implement it most effectively, they refined it and refined it and refined it to get it into almost like quite a mastery of this process of managing fatigue at work, when you saw people that were well down the track and still experiencing that fatigue. And when I considered clinical application, obviously this is just a brainstorm I thought in relation to how I could apply these concepts or what I learned from these participants into a clinical situation. I guess the biggest thing was that process of learning needs to be embraced. So we need to allow people to experience what I call sort of supported crashes in their energy, to allow them to know, oh, this is actually what it feels like. I don't want to be there. And there's an element of that acceptance within there, and knowing that this is what those extreme symptoms are, and there are a lot of steps before them. So getting them to understand their own fatigue symptoms and what it feels like for them, because you can't tell them these are the symptoms that you're going to have. Everybody is different. Encouraging that will actually sort of help them learn a lot more. But I guess being supportive and reflecting and getting them to write down those diaries and things like that, so that you can identify these up and downs and how they felt and where the symptoms came in and what they could have done differently the next time that occurs, and sort of really getting a good idea of that. I came up with a concept of possibly ranking the fatigue symptoms, so considering all these fatigue symptoms and then thinking about, is there an order that these occur? Do some occur right down when you're absolutely exhausted, and some of those very early signs that you can actually pick up on to get that really good refinement of your strategies? So, as I mentioned, really doing that reflection, but also giving them the tools of the types of strategies that they could use within their different environments, and the different types of breaks and how it applies to their work situation or the situation that they're trying to negotiate and get back into. How these breaks would actually look on that practical format of their situation is huge, and then allowing them to apply these strategies. In doing that, using the fatigue diaries as a learning tool is huge, because it offers that reflection on what they've done and how they've applied something or not applied, how something worked or didn't work, and then continuing to support that trial and error and learning to refine the strategies. So what I I have come up with a diagram of sort of a clinical application of my outcome of my thesis that I would love to go through with you guys if you attend when I'm talking in person. And also I've got the full diagram, which will be, I can also sort of showing you that as well, what it looks like. So thank you for listening to me today, and I look forward to answering any questions or elaborating any further on anything that you want to. Thank you. My ref in there if you need them. And I'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you, Rochelle. Masterful. And I'm really pleased to say that Sarah Lillis is with us now live. Hello, Sarah. And I'll put my video camera on, and maybe you'll put yours on too.
Yeah, it's just starting. Can you
There
hear
we
me okay?
hooray. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, how are
Welcome.
you?
So we've got a number of people with us, which is really exciting. So a number of people are able to join us live. And right there at the end of your presentation, Sarah, you mentioned that you'd sort of come up with a more clinical diagram.
Yeah.
And I wonder if perhaps you'd like to share that first, and then we'll open this for questions for other people. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds
great.
Fine.
Right. I will try and share my screen. I haven't had a great deal of success in this so far, but I have.
Well, I did also email it if you just want to bring it up, Jean.
Yes.
It will work fine.
Yeah. How about that? Is that working?
Yep, that's in front.
Good.
So, yeah, it's just cool. So this, I mean, this is based very similar to obviously the one I showed within the presentation. This has a little bit more information on it. The one I had in the presentation didn't have the breakdown of the different types of breaks and different types of tasks. I have a big one that also has that as well. I considered the clinical app to try and make it as user-friendly for a client. So I've had a lot of clients talking about their battery. Some people talk about the petrol tank, some people talk about their battery. So I quite like the battery concept with how my continuum looked. So that's why I've made it look like a battery with kind of that full charge at the top with the green, and the starting to get absolutely no charge when they're needing that sleep and day off. So that concept within the battery is similar to what I've presented. It's just sort of what is a battery. And then I've considered the home within that, what happens at home, what happens out of work as being our base, our home, and the things that people bring out in that, that non-work activity, relaxation, exercise. And then the hands kind of weighing it up, thinking, there is that balance between these two. Often the work is that higher balance that people put a lot more priority on that in those initial stages, and reduce that sort of home balance. So that's sort of signifying that in there. And talking around how that balance works. So I often bring this in with clients when I'm working with them, along with actually what I talked about, that ranking system. I do the ranking as well to try and tap into their symptoms and how it applies on here with what type of break they take. Yeah.
Sarah, sorry, question from me. The ranking, that's individual ranking within them as individuals as to their own ranking system?
Yeah, their own. I kind of, I often start off doing because it's really from the research I found so many people talked about these different ranks of symptom, like my early symptoms, my late symptoms, my crash symptoms, or they really had it as this this continuum of symptoms as they did the continuum of strategies. So I found actually starting to get them to really think about their symptoms, doing a lot more of that self-reflection, and it's thinking about what is that first symptom, and is that actually the first symptom, is there one before that, and what are those later symptoms, and trying to get that in a way that they see it all together in a top to bottom, rather than just this chaos of things that are happening and not really knowing what's going on. And I guess that allows them a bit more control, because they're actually feeling, oh, that's going to be the next one, and this is kind of the strategy I do, and this is the strategy I do. So yeah, so I actually work hand in hand with those when I apply, I do that clinical app of my research.
Cool.
Sarah, one of the things I noticed in the diagrams you had in your voiceover PowerPoint is you had quite a lot of lovely rainbow arrows going backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
And they're not on this diagram. What were those rainbow arrows representing? What was that about?
So yeah, that's one of the bits of info that sort of wasn't on that shorter one in the presentation, but they basically indicate the that complexity of that decision and moving around the strategies. So I obviously mentioned that it wasn't just purely about that level of fatigue or where their symptom was. When they're at work, there are a lot more of those. Those are all other things that come in, like the expectations of themselves and how they believe they are as a worker, and their impact on their ability to actually stop within the work, how other people perceived them, the amount of support they had in work, the structure of the work and the allowance for breaks within that work, and also, you know, the type of management style that they had and all that. So the arrows in the multicolour are actually representing, each colour represents a different one of those things that were coming in to make that decision. Sorry, I lost the word there. And,
yeah, no, those influences.
Yeah, the influences, thank you. And then, you know, how complex that decision was to move from task to task, that it wasn't just a simple, oh, I'm feeling this symptom, I'm going to move to that task. Because if it was that simple, I think people would actually manage their fatigue a lot better. But there's so much other stuff that comes in that's more on ourselves and also on the environment that we're in.
And people don't necessarily move in a linear way, do they, Sarah? They don't move from high intensity to low intensity to super mini break to mini break to long break necessarily, do they?
No, my participants didn't, and what I observe when I see people definitely aren't. And I do note that people that are less masterful over their fatigue will tend to be on those orange and red kind of ends, and people that are gaining more mastery over their fatigue tends to be in the green zone, in the more productive zone. So I do think, yeah, there's a lot of, it's really going back and forth, and jumping up and down depending on where their fatigue symptoms is. They might take a long break at lunch and they've actually been able to plan that, and then they jump back up to either a high intensity task or a low intensity task, depending on sometimes the time of week, how they're feeling, what they did at the weekend, any of that, they can just jump to a different place.
Great. So I'm wondering if anyone else has any questions for Sarah.
I do, if that's okay.
Please go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation. I enjoyed that, and I like that visual representation that you've got there with the battery and the house.
Thanks, Carol.
My question is, I may have missed this to begin with, Sarah. I just wondered if your work was only around strategies that people had found effective. And the second part of that, it doesn't appear from what you've said here as though anybody mentioned proactive strategies, so trying to preempt that fatigue occurring by using things like alerts on their phone, for example. Have you got any comments about that? Thank you.
So sorry, just thinking about your second question. I love double loaded ones. I've just lost the first question, the first part of your question.
Was it all about strategies that are effective?
Oh yeah, I mean the strategies, you're talking about the strategies that were not effective, and I guess when they talked about strategies that were effective, they were saying they were avoiding things. So they were avoiding you know, certain social environments at certain times. So I guess that's the strategy that isn't effective, is staying in a social environment when you're tired. You know, I guess inadvertently they were saying the ineffective strategy by saying the positives. And in regards, oh man, where's my brain? I think I got a concussion yesterday. I think that's where I'm heading today. So I just realised at the end of the day, I'm like, oh. So can you repeat the second part of the question, Jill? Sorry.
I didn't notice that you identified anybody saying they were using preemptive strategies like alerts on their phone.
Oh yeah. No, not many people did use the alerts on their phone because they tended to listen to their symptoms rather than the alerts, interesting enough. I do find the alerts on the phone, or saying take a break every hour within my own clinical work, is quite an early strategy for people that are just starting to be familiar with that concept of fatigue. But I found they moved quite readily away from that because they found it interrupted with their flow of work or their ability to do tasks, or in a meeting suddenly having an alert that says, hey, you need to take a break, or you need to do this. It's quite disruptive to how they were perceived. And I think that was a huge thing in that work environment, is you know, that whole perception of self and how people perceive them within the work environment.
Cool, thank you.
Have we got any other questions from people who are listening?
Yeah, Sarah, I was just wondering, were the participants people who had experienced their first TBI, or were some of them people who had previously had TBIs and were learning from past experience with how they return to work when taking breaks?
None of them were talking about experiences of previous TBIs. I can't, I'm purely going off memory on this one. I didn't collect any data on if someone had a previous brain injury, only just the data around their current one and how long ago it was. But no one really reflected. I can't remember any conversations around previous, the previous injury I had, I did this. So I think it was all reflective on what they were doing at that stage, because but that's just purely from my memory of the conversations.
Sure, thank you.
Rob, I'm wondering if you have any comment about this with your oversight of Rehab 706 and how this is fitting with sort of current practice in fatigue management.
It's certainly consistent, and I'm delighted to see that, in fact, the self-assessment process is so flexible, because I think the thing with mild to moderate TBI is that people's performance day to day is so variable. One question I would have for Sarah is, there's an increased tendency, particularly in safety critical tasks, to allow people to nap at work. And did you include that as one of your strategies?
To be honest, Rob, no one talked about napping at work. Some people would definitely go into a room and shut their eyes, but not lie down. So they do more that sort of closed eye relaxation, but never had the napping at work. I do come across that in my job, but out of my participants, none of them actually slept. When they got to that point, they tended to want to remove themselves from the work environment. So they were obviously, when they talked about sleep and napping, they were using it as a strategy of, I have gone too far, so I need to go home and sleep. That's the only thing I can do. In my work environment, because I didn't have obviously any that did that, the people that are napping are doing it as a prelim to, I know I've got a big afternoon of data inputting, so I'm going to have a bit of a sleep at lunchtime. So, yeah, but none of my participants did that.
I was interested because I think obviously a lot of people with TBI have insomnia as well.
Yeah.
And I think some people are quite concerned about whether napping during the day will make their insomnia worse. My understanding is it doesn't make any difference to their nighttime sleep.
Yeah, I mean, the sleep wasn't a huge, I wouldn't say any of these participants really talked about insomnia. It was sometimes getting to sleep. I can talk on my own clinical experience with that if you want, which is, I find that napping during the day, depending on where they're at with their fatigue, can help them sleep at night. If they're overtired at night, they don't fall asleep for another 2-3 hours, and they've got such an active brain because they're overtired. Whereas if they have a nap and don't become in that overtired state, that's often quite early on in their rehabilitation, then they can actually sleep at night because they're not getting into that wired tired zone. So it's that judgment of where they are with their fatigue that I find from that perspective.
Great, thank you.
My take on it, Sarah, listening to your response to Rob, is you feel that this sort of the battery and the idea of these different types of break, it's quite possible, for example, that given a long break is, some 15 to perhaps an hour away from work, that a daytime nap at work might fit into that sort of category, even if you haven't exhausted all the possibilities of how people take a long break. It would be possible to see how that matched to this idea of break type. Yeah, even if this,
definitely. And it does, I mean, that is where people that I work with who obviously are doing that sleep at work and have that acceptance within their work environment, they do take it in their lunch break. They'll take and sometimes it is only a 15-minute sleep. They time it as a 15-minute, but that's, probably a half an hour all up once they actually fall asleep, but it's sufficient. So yeah, definitely. I think it's something that really depends on that work environment and acceptance. I've had a few that have been using things like baby rooms and having other mums saying this is a problem, and you shouldn't be in here, you haven't got a baby, and just finding the right place to actually nap is interesting.
Yeah. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions? We've got up to about another 10 minutes to go, and I don't want to keep people longer than they want to be here, but I do want to allow time for questions if there are any more. Sarah, I do have one last question for you, which is actually not specifically about the topic, but there may be people here who are thinking ahead to possibly doing some research of their own. And I wondered if you wanted to make a comment on what it was like to do master's research and this type of research.
The qualitative?
Yes, yes.
What was it like? I actually remember Rachel saying this when I first started. You talked about your one, and I was like, oh. I think the challenge for me was doing qualitative, because I'm quite a scientific, numbers person. I'm not a words person. And when I thought about this topic, I realized, oh man, I'm going to have to do qualitative. I'm going to have to do it. I'm going to have to launch into this world of words and things that really just bamboozle me, because give me a number, I feel happy and content, and give me a letter and I'm not so. So that was my first hurdle that I had to get over in my head. And I think breaking it down and making it into something that seemed a bit numbery in my mind was a lot better. I don't know how I did it, but somehow I was able to break it into categories. And so yeah, I really enjoyed the research process actually, so I would be recommending it for anyone to do that thesis type process if they're considering their masters, because it, there's so many things that you learn about the process of ethics and the process of putting together that whole proposal and getting out there, and then actually doing seeing how it works in practice, actually doing your own research and reflecting on it and getting some results. It's good, I love it.
And Sarah, I'd like to end then by saying congratulations. It's a wonderful piece of master's research. And one of the things that I think is particularly great about it is that it clearly has clinical application. You're clearly using it with your clients, and it's clearly having an influence in the way you work with them. And it seems like your clients are finding it useful too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Most of them say they do, but they could just be saying that to my face.
No, it certainly sounds like from some of the comments we've had that it rings bells with other clinicians who are on the call as well. So Sarah, thank you very much for your time and your energy today. It's been a great pleasure, and thank you to everyone who's joined. Thank you for contributing by listening and asking questions and being engaged with our eSeminar. You're all on mute, but while I'm not, I'm going to give the clap for all of us. Thank you very much, Sarah. Great presentation, and thank you. So that brings us to the conclusion of this session, everybody. So ka kite, and see you at another one.
Thanks, Sarah. Very comprehensive. Great stuff.
Thank you.